According to multiple international reports, a series of high-level political and security developments have unfolded almost simultaneously across Europe, the Middle East, and Asia, raising concerns about a rapid shift in the global balance of power. At the center of these developments stands Chinese President Xi Jinping, who has intensified diplomatic engagement with key Middle Eastern leaders, while European figures such as French President Emmanuel Macron move forward with new security initiatives outside traditional frameworks. At the same time, former U.S. President Donald Trump has emerged as one of the most controversial figures in this evolving landscape, as several newly forming alliances appear to operate without his direct involvement. In Europe, discussions around a multinational maritime security structure have accelerated, with coordination efforts led by France and supported by other regional actors, aiming to establish a more independent operational framework. Meanwhile, in Asia, Beijing has expanded its strategic outreach through high-level meetings and cooperation proposals, signaling a more active role in shaping regional and international security dynamics. In parallel, developments on the battlefield have introduced new forms of warfare, including the use of unmanned systems and autonomous operations, which are beginning to challenge traditional military doctrines. These events are not unfolding in isolation, but rather in overlapping sequences that suggest a broader pattern of coordination and strategic repositioning among major global actors. What makes the situation more striking is that several long-standing alliances are beginning to show signs of recalibration as countries reassess their strategic priorities and explore alternative security arrangements. At the same time, economic and technological competition is intensifying, with new networks of cooperation emerging alongside shifts in energy trade, financial flows, and global supply chains. Observers increasingly note that this is not a conventional geopolitical confrontation, but a multidimensional restructuring of influence driven by diplomacy, economic leverage, and technological capability. In this evolving context, the role of the United States as a central organizing force in global affairs is being questioned more openly, as both allies and competitors adjust to a changing strategic environment. The pace of these developments has surprised many analysts, with multiple events occurring in close succession and reinforcing the perception of a system under transformation. As traditional structures begin to shift, new configurations of power are taking shape, driven by practical interests rather than established alliances. This raises a critical question that remains unanswered. Is the world witnessing a temporary realignment of alliances, or the early stages of a deeper transformation that could redefine the global order? Welcome to our channel, where we break down complex global developments into clear and structured analysis based on verified international information. This story is not about a single country rising or falling, but about a system that is beginning to shift under pressure from multiple directions at the same time. For decades, the global order has largely been shaped by a central framework in which the United States played a leading role in security, finance, and international coordination. From NATO in Europe to security guarantees in the Middle East, and from global trade systems to financial dominance, this structure created a relatively stable but highly centralized balance of power. However, recent developments suggest that this structure is no longer functioning in the same way as before. Across multiple regions, countries are no longer waiting for a single center of power to define the rules or provide security guarantees. Instead, they are beginning to act independently, forming new partnerships and testing alternative frameworks that better serve their immediate interests. In Europe, discussions about strategic autonomy have gained momentum, with key leaders openly exploring security arrangements that operate beyond traditional alliances. In the Middle East, nations are diversifying their relationships, engaging with multiple powers simultaneously rather than relying on a single external protector. In Asia, China is expanding its diplomatic and economic reach, positioning itself as a central player in a more interconnected but less centralized system. These shifts are not isolated reactions, but part of a broader pattern that reflects deeper structural changes in global politics. One of the key drivers behind this transformation is the increasing complexity of modern conflicts, where traditional military dominance is no longer the only determining factor. Technological advancements, economic resilience, and flexible alliances are becoming equally important in shaping influence and power. At the same time, internal dynamics within major powers are also playing a critical role. Political divisions, strategic disagreements, and competing priorities can weaken the ability of any single country to maintain consistent global leadership. This creates openings that other nations are quick to recognize and utilize. As a result, the global system is gradually moving away from a model dominated by a single power toward a more fragmented and dynamic structure. This transition does not happen overnight, but it can accelerate rapidly when multiple events align within a short period of time. That is precisely what appears to be happening now. With simultaneous developments in Europe, the Middle East, and Asia, the pace of change has increased to a level that is difficult to ignore. What makes this moment particularly significant is not just the number of events, but the direction in which they are pointing. They suggest a world where influence is negotiated rather than assumed, and where power must be constantly maintained rather than taken for granted. This raises several critical questions. If traditional alliances are being redefined, who will set the new rules? If security structures become more decentralized, can stability still be maintained? And most importantly, is the current shift a temporary adjustment or the beginning of a long-term transformation that could reshape the global order? According to the sequence of recent developments, the turning point began with a series of coordinated moves across Europe, where new security discussions were initiated at a pace that surprised many observers. At the center of this phase was French President Emmanuel Macron, who publicly moved to launch a multinational initiative aimed at securing maritime routes in a key strategic corridor. This initiative was presented as a defensive framework, but its structure and coordination indicated a broader objective of reorganizing influence beyond traditional alignment. With France and the United Kingdom taking leading roles, several regional and international actors began to show interest in participating in this emerging structure. The significance of this move lies not only in its operational goal, but in the fact that it signals a shift away from reliance on a single dominant security provider. At the same time, this development coincided with intensified diplomatic activity in Asia, where Chinese President Xi Jinping expanded engagement with key partners in the Middle East. High-level meetings were conducted with regional leaders, focusing on cooperation, stability, and long-term strategic alignment. During these engagements, the messaging emphasized a choice between cooperation and confrontation, highlighting the importance of coordinated approaches to security and development. This was not framed as a direct challenge, but as a clear indication of willingness to take on a more active and visible role. What made the situation more complex was the timing of these developments. As Europe initiated new security discussions, China simultaneously expanded its diplomatic presence in the Middle East, creating a pattern of parallel movement. Multiple visits, agreements, and consultations were carried out within a short period, suggesting a rapid consolidation of new relationships. In addition, European leaders also began to engage more actively with China, exploring cooperation in areas such as technology and industrial development. This interaction reflected a broader reassessment of strategic partnerships, particularly in light of evolving global conditions. In contrast to these coordinated actions, former U.S. President Donald Trump appeared increasingly isolated within this sequence of events. Statements that generated controversy, combined with tensions in existing alliances, contributed to a perception of reduced influence in shaping ongoing developments. At the same time, another critical shift was taking place in the field of military operations. New methods involving unmanned systems and automated operations began to demonstrate practical effectiveness in real-world scenarios. In one notable case, positions were secured without direct human deployment, relying instead on advanced technological systems. This development challenged long-standing assumptions about how military advantage is achieved and maintained. As a result, several countries began to reassess their security needs and explore alternative models that prioritize flexibility and rapid response. In regions such as the Middle East, this shift triggered a series of consultations among multiple nations seeking to strengthen their defensive capabilities. Meetings and exchanges took place involving several key countries, focusing on countering emerging threats and protecting critical infrastructure. The common objective was clear: to develop systems that are adaptable, efficient, and less dependent on traditional external guarantees. At the same time, discussions emerged about the possibility of forming new security groupings that operate independently of existing frameworks. Proposals included cooperation between European countries and regional partners, combining technological capabilities with operational experience. This approach reflects a move toward more modular and responsive security structures. Meanwhile, within the United States, internal reactions began to surface as policymakers and security officials assessed the implications of these developments. Discussions focused on the potential emergence of a strategic gap and the consequences of reduced engagement in certain regions. These debates were not theoretical, but directly linked to decisions on defense priorities, international commitments, and crisis response strategies. Differences in perspective became more visible, with some arguing for reduced involvement and others warning of long-term risks. This internal dynamic added another layer of complexity to an already evolving global situation. Simultaneously, political developments in Europe further highlighted the changing landscape. Shifts in leadership and public sentiment indicated that traditional alignments were being reconsidered at multiple levels. In some cases, outcomes reflected a move towards stronger integration within regional structures, while in others they revealed underlying divisions. These changes influenced how countries position themselves in relation to broader geopolitical trends. In this environment, influence was no longer determined solely by historical alliances, but increasingly by current actions and strategic adaptability. Taken together, these events form a sequence that illustrates a broader transformation. Rather than a single decisive moment, the shift is occurring through a series of interconnected developments across multiple regions. Each event reinforces the others, creating momentum that is difficult to reverse once established. The key characteristic of this transformation is not confrontation, but redistribution. Influence is being recalculated, relationships are being redefined, and new structures are gradually taking shape. To understand why the current developments are so significant, it is necessary to look at the historical structure that has defined global security and power distribution for decades. Following the end of World War II, the United States emerged as the central architect of a new international order built on a combination of military alliances, economic institutions, and political influence. Organizations such as NATO in Europe and a network of security partnerships in the Middle East and Asia formed the backbone of this system. This structure was not only about defense, but also about maintaining stability through a predictable framework of cooperation and deterrence. For many years, this model proved effective, allowing the United States to project influence across multiple regions while ensuring that its allies remained within a coordinated strategic environment. The concept often referred to as the security umbrella became a defining feature of this system. Under this arrangement, countries aligned with the United States benefited from protection and support, while contributing to a broader framework of collective security. However, this model has always depended on two critical conditions. First, the ability of the United States to maintain consistent global engagement. Second, the willingness of its allies to rely on that engagement as the primary source of security. Over time, both of these conditions have come under increasing pressure. As global challenges have become more complex, the demands placed on the system have grown significantly. Conflicts are no longer limited to conventional warfare, but include cyber operations, economic competition, and technological rivalry. At the same time, the cost of maintaining a global presence has increased, both financially and politically. This has led to periodic debates within the United States about the extent of its international commitments. In parallel, other countries have begun to reassess their own strategic positions. Rising powers have sought greater influence, while traditional allies have started to question the reliability and predictability of existing arrangements. This process has not occurred suddenly, but has developed gradually over several years. Tensions in various regions, shifting economic priorities, and evolving political landscapes have all contributed to this trend. One important factor is the diversification of global power centers. Instead of a single dominant force, multiple actors now possess the capacity to influence outcomes in different regions. This creates a more complex and less predictable environment. Another factor is the acceleration of technological change. Advancements in areas such as artificial intelligence, unmanned systems, and digital infrastructure have altered the nature of both competition and cooperation. Countries that can adapt quickly to these changes gain strategic advantages, while those that lag behind may find their influence reduced. In addition, economic interdependence has become both a strength and a vulnerability. Global supply chains and financial networks connect countries more closely than ever before, but they also create points of pressure that can be used in times of conflict. As a result, nations are increasingly seeking to balance integration with autonomy. This shift toward strategic independence is particularly visible in regions that have historically relied on external security guarantees. In Europe, discussions about defense capabilities and operational independence have intensified. In the Middle East, countries are pursuing diversified partnerships to reduce reliance on any single external actor. In Asia, regional dynamics are being reshaped by the growing influence of China and the responses of neighboring states. All of these developments point to a common underlying reality. The global system is moving away from a centralized structure toward a more distributed and adaptive model. This transition does not eliminate the role of existing powers, but it changes how that role is exercised. Influence becomes less about dominance and more about the ability to build flexible networks and respond effectively to changing conditions. The current moment is therefore not an isolated disruption, but part of a longer historical trajectory. What makes it distinct is the speed at which multiple factors are converging. Security, economics, technology, and politics are all shifting simultaneously, creating a level of complexity that is difficult to manage through traditional approaches. In this context, the actions of individual countries take on greater significance. Each decision contributes to the overall direction of the system, reinforcing trends that may become increasingly difficult to reverse. The question is no longer whether change is happening, but whether existing structures can adapt quickly enough to remain relevant. One of the most critical aspects of the current transformation lies in the changing nature of modern warfare and security management. Traditional military doctrines have long been based on the deployment of large forces, territorial control, and direct confrontation between opposing sides. However, recent developments indicate that this model is undergoing a fundamental shift. New operational concepts are emerging that rely heavily on unmanned systems, automation, and precision coordination rather than large-scale human deployment. In practical terms, this means that strategic objectives can increasingly be achieved without exposing personnel to direct risk. In one notable example, positions were secured using remotely operated or autonomous systems, demonstrating that control can be established through technological capability rather than physical presence. This approach significantly reduces the cost of engagement while increasing operational flexibility. It also allows for faster adaptation to changing conditions on the ground. As a result, countries are beginning to reassess how they design their defense strategies. Instead of focusing solely on conventional capabilities, there is a growing emphasis on integrating advanced technologies into security frameworks. This includes the development of drone systems, automated response mechanisms, and real-time intelligence coordination. At the same time, these technological shifts are influencing how alliances are structured. Traditional alliances have typically been based on long-term commitments and centralized command structures. However, the emerging model favors smaller, more flexible groupings that can respond quickly to specific threats. These arrangements are often built around shared interests rather than formal treaties, allowing for greater adaptability. In this context, coordination becomes more important than hierarchy. Countries seek partners that can provide immediate operational value rather than relying on distant guarantees. This shift is particularly evident in regions facing dynamic security challenges. Nations are prioritizing rapid response capabilities, localized defense systems, and interoperable technologies. Another important factor is the speed at which these changes are being implemented. Unlike previous transitions, which took years or even decades, the current shift is occurring over much shorter timeframes. This acceleration is driven by the rapid pace of technological innovation and the urgency of emerging threats. As new systems are tested and deployed, their effectiveness quickly becomes apparent. This creates a feedback loop where successful models are rapidly adopted by other actors. At the same time, existing structures may struggle to keep up with this pace. Large, complex systems often require extensive coordination and approval processes, which can slow down decision-making. This creates a gap between those who can adapt quickly and those who cannot. In addition, internal factors within major powers can further complicate the situation. Diverging strategic priorities, political debates, and institutional constraints can reduce the ability to respond effectively to external developments. This is particularly relevant when decisions involve long-term commitments or significant resource allocation. As a result, even countries with substantial capabilities may find it difficult to maintain consistent strategic direction. Another dimension of this transformation is the integration of economic and technological tools into security strategies. Sanctions, trade policies, and technological restrictions are increasingly used alongside traditional military measures. However, their effectiveness depends on the level of control over global systems. When alternative networks and systems begin to emerge, the impact of these tools can diminish. This creates a situation where influence must be maintained through multiple channels simultaneously. Countries are therefore investing in diversified approaches that combine military readiness, economic resilience, and technological innovation. The goal is not only to respond to threats, but to shape the environment in which those threats arise. In this evolving landscape, adaptability becomes the most valuable strategic asset. Rigid structures and fixed assumptions are less effective in a context defined by rapid change and uncertainty. Instead, success depends on the ability to anticipate developments, adjust strategies, and build flexible networks of cooperation. This applies not only to individual countries, but also to the alliances and partnerships they form. Ultimately, the transformation underway is not limited to a single domain. It spans military, economic, technological, and political dimensions, creating a highly interconnected system. Managing this complexity requires a different approach from the one that defined previous eras. The question is whether existing frameworks can evolve quickly enough to remain relevant in this new environment. As the situation continues to evolve, reactions from different regions have begun to reveal the broader implications of these developments on the global stage. In Europe, responses have been far from uniform, reflecting both a desire for greater autonomy and underlying divisions within the region. Some leaders have emphasized the need to strengthen independent security capabilities, while others remain cautious about moving too far away from established alliances. At the same time, diplomatic signals indicate a growing willingness to explore alternative partnerships, particularly in areas related to energy, technology, and strategic coordination. This shift suggests that Europe is not acting as a single unified bloc, but rather as a collection of states adjusting their positions based on national interests. Meanwhile, in the Middle East, countries have responded with a pragmatic approach, focusing on flexibility and diversification in their external relationships. Rather than relying on a single security provider, regional actors are increasingly engaging with multiple partners to balance risks and opportunities. This has led to a series of high-level meetings and consultations aimed at strengthening cooperation across different domains. The emphasis has been placed on practical outcomes, including defense capabilities, infrastructure, protection, and economic stability. In Asia, the response has been shaped by the growing influence of China and the strategic calculations of neighboring countries. Beijing's increased diplomatic activity has been met with both interest and caution, as regional actors assess the potential benefits and risks of deeper engagement. At the same time, economic cooperation continues to expand, reinforcing interconnected relationships across the region. This dual approach reflects a broader trend of balancing engagement with strategic hedging. In North America, developments have also prompted notable reactions. Statements emphasizing economic independence and national resilience have gained attention, signaling a shift in how traditional partnerships are being framed. These messages highlight concerns about overdependence and the need to strengthen domestic capabilities. While not representing a complete break from existing relationships, they indicate a recalibration of priorities. In addition to government-level responses, international organizations and institutions have also been closely monitoring the situation. Discussions within policy circles have focused on the potential consequences of a more fragmented global system. Concerns include the risk of reduced coordination, increased competition, and the possibility of instability in regions with overlapping interests. At the same time, Some observers see opportunities in a more distributed structure where multiple actors contribute to maintaining balance. This perspective suggests that a diversified system may be more resilient under certain conditions. Another important aspect of the international response is the role of public communication and narrative shaping. Statements by political leaders, diplomatic representatives, and influential figures play a key role in framing how events are perceived globally. Carefully chosen language can signal intentions, reassure partners, or send warnings to competitors. In several instances, remarks have been interpreted as indicators of shifting alignments and priorities. These signals contribute to a broader understanding of how the global system is evolving. At the same time, differing interpretations of the same events highlight the complexity of the current environment. What is seen as a strategic adjustment by one actor may be viewed as a challenge by another. This creates a dynamic in which perceptions and responses continuously influence each other. As a result, managing communication becomes an essential part of international strategy. In this context, the absence or reduced visibility of certain actors in key discussions has also been noted. When major decisions are made without the participation of traditionally central players, it raises questions about the distribution of influence. This does not necessarily indicate exclusion, but it does reflect a changing pattern of engagement. Countries are increasingly willing to move forward with initiatives even when full consensus is not achieved. Taken together, these reactions illustrate a world that is actively adjusting to new conditions. No single response defines the overall trend, but the combination of actions points toward a gradual transformation. The key feature of this transformation is not confrontation, but adaptation. States are not withdrawing from the system, but reconfiguring how they interact within it. This process is ongoing and remains subject to further change as new developments emerge. As the current transformation continues to unfold, analysts are increasingly focusing on what possible scenarios could emerge from this evolving global landscape. Rather than a single predictable outcome, the situation points toward multiple pathways, each carrying different levels of risk and stability. One possible scenario is a more fragmented global system, where no single power is able to fully coordinate international responses. In this scenario, influence is distributed among several major actors, each pursuing their own strategic interests. While this could reduce direct confrontation between dominant powers, it may also lead to increased competition in overlapping regions. Without a clear central framework, coordination becomes more difficult, especially in times of crisis. This raises the risk of miscalculation, where actions taken by one side are interpreted differently by others, leading to unintended escalation. A second scenario involves the gradual formation of multiple regional blocs. In this model, countries align themselves with different groups based on economic, technological, and security interests. These blocs may cooperate in certain areas while competing in others, creating a complex network of relationships. Such a system could provide a degree of stability within regions, but may also increase divisions at the global level. Interactions between blocs could become more transactional, with less emphasis on long-term commitments. A third scenario suggests that existing powers, including the United States, may adapt to the changing environment and maintain significant influence. In this case, adjustments in strategy, renewed engagement, and updated alliances could help stabilize the system. Rather than losing relevance, established actors would reposition themselves within a more flexible framework. This scenario depends heavily on the ability to respond quickly and effectively to emerging challenges. However, it also requires internal cohesion and consistent policy direction. In all scenarios, one common factor is the increasing importance of adaptability. Countries that can adjust their strategies, build diverse partnerships, and integrate new technologies are more likely to maintain or expand their influence. Those that rely on fixed assumptions or slow decision-making processes may face growing challenges. Another key risk lies in the intersection of different domains. Security, economics, technology, and information are becoming increasingly interconnected. Developments in one area can quickly impact others, creating cascading effects across the system. For example, shifts in energy trade can influence financial stability, which in turn affects political decisions. Similarly, technological competition can reshape military capabilities and alter strategic calculations. This interconnectedness makes it more difficult to isolate problems and manage them independently. At the same time, the role of perception and information is becoming more critical. How events are interpreted can influence responses as much as the events themselves. Narratives, media coverage, and public opinion all contribute to shaping the strategic environment. In a rapidly evolving situation, controlling the narrative can be as important as controlling physical assets. Another layer of complexity comes from domestic factors within individual countries. Political debates, economic pressures, and social dynamics can all influence how governments respond to external developments. This means that international outcomes are often shaped by internal considerations as much as external ones. In some cases, domestic priorities may limit the ability to take decisive action on the global stage. In others, they may drive more assertive behavior as leaders seek to reinforce their positions. This interaction between internal and external dynamics adds unpredictability to the system. It also makes long-term forecasting more challenging. Despite these uncertainties, certain trends appear consistent across different scenarios. There is a clear movement toward diversification of partnerships. There is an increasing reliance on technology as a strategic tool, and there is a growing emphasis on flexibility and resilience. These trends suggest that the global system is entering a phase where stability will depend less on rigid structures and more on the ability to adapt. The key question is how quickly and effectively different actors can make that transition. If adaptation is slow or uneven, the risk of instability increases. If it is coordinated and balanced, a new form of equilibrium may emerge. Ultimately, the future will likely be shaped not by a single decisive event, but by the accumulation of multiple interconnected developments. Each decision, each alliance, and each innovation will contribute to the overall direction of the system. The challenge for all actors is to navigate this complexity without triggering unintended consequences. And the central uncertainty remains. Will the emerging system lead to greater balance and shared influence, or to deeper divisions and prolonged competition? As the sequence of events continues to unfold, one conclusion becomes increasingly clear. The global system is not collapsing in a sudden or dramatic way, but it is undergoing a steady and complex transformation. This transformation is driven not by a single actor, but by the combined actions of multiple countries adjusting to new realities. Across Europe, the Middle East, and Asia, decisions are being made that reflect a shift away from traditional dependencies toward more flexible and self-defined strategies. At the same time, new forms of cooperation are emerging, shaped by practical needs rather than historical alignments. These developments do not point to a simple transfer of power from one country to another. Instead, they suggest a redistribution of influence across a wider range of actors. In this environment, no single nation holds complete control over the direction of global affairs. Influence must be maintained through continuous engagement, adaptation, and coordination. For the United States, this moment represents both a challenge and a test. The ability to respond effectively will depend on strategic clarity, internal cohesion, and the willingness to adjust to changing conditions. For other countries, the shifting landscape presents opportunities as well as risks. Expanding influence requires not only ambition, but also the capacity to navigate uncertainty and build sustainable partnerships. What is emerging is a system that is more dynamic, but also more complex. Stability in such a system will depend less on fixed structures and more on the interactions between its participants. Each decision contributes to shaping the broader trajectory, reinforcing patterns that may define the future. At the same time, the pace of change adds an additional layer of pressure. When developments occur rapidly and simultaneously across multiple regions, the margin for error becomes smaller. This increases the importance of careful decision-making and strategic foresight. In this context, the role of leadership becomes particularly significant. Clear direction, consistent policy, and effective communication are essential in navigating periods of uncertainty. Without these elements, even strong positions can become difficult to sustain. Looking ahead, the central question remains unresolved. Is the world moving toward a more balanced and cooperative structure, or toward a more fragmented and competitive one? The answer will depend on how current trends evolve and how key actors respond to them. This is not a moment defined by a single event, but by a series of interconnected developments that continue to shape each other. Understanding these dynamics is essential for interpreting what lies ahead. And now, the discussion extends beyond analysis. What is your perspective on these changes? Do you believe the current shift will lead to a more stable global system or to greater uncertainty and competition? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this analysis helpful, consider liking the video and sharing it with others who are interested in global affairs. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel to stay updated with future in-depth reports and analysis.